Hola, muy buenos días a todos y todas. Bienvenidos al segundo día de este festival de ideas del área de diseño, las culturas y las artes, del ministerio, perdón, un poco temprano en este día nublado. Tenemos hoy nuestra segunda masterclass de este mes del diseño. Estamos de aniversario, estamos cumpliendo 10 años, así que estamos muy emocionados de poder contar con una gran invitada hoy, de haber podido desde el ministerio tener a Sabine Junginger, que le pido por favor que prenda su cámara para poder saludarla. Sabine, ¿estás ahí con nosotros? Sabine. Buenos días, Sabine. Estamos con traducción simultánea para
Buenos
todos.
días.
Buenos días para todos quienes nos están viendo. Esta sesión, esta masterclass, está relacionada con estos bordes del diseño en los cuales hemos ido transitando durante estos 10 años, relacionado con el diseño y su potencial e impacto en el ámbito de lo social, desde las prácticas del diseño participativo o innovación social hasta espacios de innovación en políticas públicas. En esta charla, Sabine reflexionará y nos va a explicar diferentes perspectivas para pensar y discutir la práctica del diseño social en un contexto de cambio. Un poco de historia, un poco de actualidad, para que vayamos viendo cómo podemos influir en la sociedad, entendiendo que estamos en un periodo de cambios, de transición, y no solo el diseño está en un tránsito, descubriendo nuevas rutas y bordes. Sabine es experta en principios, métodos y procesos de diseño centrados en el ser humano. No voy a ahondar más en su biografía, ya que está con nosotros Javiera Godoy, que también le pido que prenda su cámara. Bienvenida, Javiera. Ella será la moderadora de esta masterclass de hoy. No sé si Javiera está.
Hola, Trini. Hi, Sabine.
Hola, Javiera. Entonces, esperando que Javiera se prenda su cámara, ahí sí, los dejo a todos y todas en esta segunda masterclass y esperando que Sabine nos dé conocimiento para poder seguir profundizando en estas temáticas sociales ligadas al diseño. Muchas gracias, Sabine, muchas gracias, Javiera, muchas gracias a todos.
Excelente, muchas gracias, Trinidad. Es un honor para mí tener a Sabine Junginger here, que nos va a contar sobre su perspectiva en estos nuevos desafíos del diseño social. Primero que todo, quiero decir buenos días a todas y todos los que están conectados en este segundo día de la serie Ideas y Conversaciones, los tránsitos del diseño, uno de los múltiples eventos de este mes del diseño 2021, llamado Diseño en Tránsito, organizado por el Ministerio de las Culturas, las Artes y el Patrimonio, que se estará desarrollando durante todo octubre. Antes de comenzar, le quiero decir a nuestra audiencia que esta masterclass tendrá traducción simultánea, como lo pueden ver en el chat, por lo que pueden apretar el icono de mundo en Zoom abajo y seleccionar el idioma español o inglés en la manera en que lo quieran escuchar. Parto con presentarme. Mi nombre es Javiera Godoy, soy arquitecta, académica y diseñadora de servicios en UNIT, con quienes estamos colaborando en el mes del diseño junto al Ministerio. Y en esta ocasión seré la moderadora de esta segunda masterclass titulada Nuevas perspectivas, Nuevas perspectivas para el diseño social, o New Approaches on Social Design, que contará con una clase magistral, como todos sabrán, de la profesora y doctora Sabine Junginger. Muchas gracias desde ya por la invitación al Ministerio, a Trinidad y a UNIT para participar de esta conversación. En este 10º aniversario del mes del diseño, estaremos explorando a través de una serie de eventos, como les contaba, los desafíos actuales que presenta la disciplina, como también las oportunidades de expandir la práctica y también el alcance de iniciativas de diseño. Y también para potenciar su habilidad de tránsito hacia otras áreas, otros ámbitos, territorios y comunidades. Y en términos de territorio, veo que tenemos en nuestra audiencia una variedad de personas de distintos lugares, así que saludos a las ciudades de Valparaíso, San Pedro de la Paz, Talca, en Chile, y también a una diversidad de países como Argentina, Reino Unido, Suiza, donde nos acompaña Sabine, Colombia, España, Puerto Rico, entre otros. Lo que nos pone muy contentos y contentas en el sentido de poder ampliar estas conversaciones acerca del diseño. Y bueno, desde ya les doy la bienvenida a esta segunda masterclass de la serie, Nuevas perspectivas para el diseño social, donde tenemos el honor de contar con la profesora y con la doctora también, Sabine Junginger, quien es experta, como les decía Trinidad, una experta internacional en principios, métodos y procesos de diseño centrado en las personas, en el ámbito público y privado, con reconocidos proyectos e investigaciones en los cuales ha explorado sobre la creación, pero también la implementación de políticas públicas, como actividades de diseño fundamentales en la era de la transformación digital, y a quien introduciré con mayor profundidad brevemente. Como ya sabrán por su nombre, el foco de esta clase magistral estará puesto en el tema que siempre nos ha convocado a todas y todos, pero con especial interés en estos últimos años de cambio a nivel mundial y específicamente nacional, lo social. El diseño jamás ha estado exento de estos procesos de cambio, y este evento buscará explorar las formas y vías en que el diseño es impactado por los cambios sociales, pero también, a su vez, tiene el poder de iniciarlos, tiene el poder de modificarlos y también de transformarlos. El diseño social se ve reflejado día a día en políticas públicas, en innovación social, en diseño participativo y en muchas otras manifestaciones donde no solamente diseñadores de profesión, sino muchos otros individuos comienzan a darle forma a un mundo construido que no tiene que ver solamente con las paredes y los edificios, sino también al ecosistema, al planeta, de forma de crear futuros y territorios mejores y también más democráticos. Como sabrán, esta mañana tendremos esta clase con la profesora y doctora Sabine Junginger, quien es directora del Competence Centered Research in Design and Management en la Universidad de Ciencias Aplicadas y Artes de Lucerne, y también es miembro del International Advisory Board of the Design Research Society y miembro del Consejo Asesor de Editorial de Design Issues. También Sabine es Fellow en Heritage School Berlín y cofundadora y chairwoman de la organización alemana sin fines de lucro Next Learning, con su proyecto principal llamado Política para el Mañana, como también cofundadora de la Swiss Service Design Network. Sabine ha trabajado como experta senior en diseño en proyectos ministeriales en el EU-Brasil Sectorial Dialogues y también en la Universidad Libre de Berlín. Tiene una maestría en diseño y también un doctorado en diseño en la Universidad Carnegie Mellon en Estados Unidos, y sus proyectos actuales incluyen Municipal, de innovación estratégica y energética a nivel municipal, y BAPEPR, Voice Assistance, People Experiences, Practices and Routines. Sabine también es autora de Transforming Public Services by Design, Reorienting Policies, Organizations and Services Around People, y también es coeditora de Design Businesses and Management, Highways and Byways to Innovation y The Handbook of Design Management. En esta charla, Sabine Junginger nos contará sobre diferentes perspectivas históricas para pensar y discutir la práctica del diseño social en un contexto de cambio, pero con especial interés en los procesos que estamos quizás viviendo en Chile también, donde cuando todo parece oscuro, aparecen también estos vacíos críticos y desafiantes que abren oportunidades para que el diseño contribuya a crear puentes entre sociedades, culturas y personas. Ahora, en términos prácticos, la estructura de esta conversación se dividirá en 30 minutos, donde Sabine nos contará de su perspectiva en estos cambios sociales a través de la masterclass, y luego tendremos aproximadamente 25, media hora para poder conversar. Así que los y las invito desde ya a poner en el chat todas las preguntas que quieran o en la función Q&A, porque las estaremos trayendo en la conversación para que podamos expandir sobre la presentación de Sabine. Y sin más, es mi honor presentar esta mañana a la profesora y doctora Sabine Junginger.
Hello. Thank you so much, Javiera. Thank you so much, Trinidad. This is a pleasure to be part of the Chile Design Month, and even more so an honor to participate and contribute to its 10th anniversary. So my topic today will be on understanding a little bit more how design plays a role in the larger scope of society and also social aspects of life. And if you allow me, I will start sharing my screen, and let's see that this hopefully works. There we go. See that? Can you see this? I hope you can see that. If you don't, let me know. I'll watch the chat, but everything is all right, I think. So my topic today is new perspectives on social design. The theme is when design takes the form of democratic engagement and serves the common good. What I will start with, oops, is it starting? Yep. What I will start with is a bit of a background as to why we're even talking about these larger scale issues in life, in human life, from a design perspective. And most of you may know that Herbert Simon was early on pointing out that there are so many designers in this world. It's not just the designers who come from the School of Design, the arts programs, but that design, we find so many efforts at designing across the disciplines, especially across the professions, and everyone who does devise a course of action to turn an existing situation into a preferred one is in the business of design. I complement that observation with the statement by Richard Buchanan, who asserts that there is no area of our contemporary life where design, and he defines this as the plan, the project, or the working hypothesis, which is linked to the intention, the intention in intentional operations, is not a significant factor in shaping human experience. That is, so on the one hand, we have Simon talking about everyone designs, or many people design, maybe not everyone, but many are faced with design challenges all around the professions and engage in it unknowingly sometimes or unaware. And then we have the other statement that looks at the big picture and says, like, you know, wherever we are in this contemporary life, design has a role here. Bruce Hannington adds to that with human-centered design research and describes it as an integrated process that includes active consultation with people, users, but of course here in the public sector, in the context of society, we're talking about citizens through various means of primary research during all phases of development. And how can that all come together in design for, you know, transition as we're talking about? And I want to point out to you in this first part of the presentation that we are always engaging in design and when we have come to some kind of a crisis in human life, in humanity. And we can trace that back to the First World War. As you can see, the soldiers here who came back very depressed and disillusioned. And there was a question about value of what is life going to be? Where is this? What is material culture here? And at the same time, you had a rise in the women's movement, a very dynamic development of new social norms, new social values, a questioning of what is it that we are, who do we want to be, how do we want to live? And out of this quest and in this context emerged the Bauhaus as an approach to tackle these questions through design. It isn't the kind of design that we're talking about today, because design is also transiting continuously and evolving with the materials and the design challenges. But we can continue and see here in the Weimar Constitution that there has been something that has emerged out of this you know, development and this change in values and norms and behaviors. And like we're seeing now in Chile, the effort resulted in a new constitution to give expression and form to these new values, norms, and desired behaviors. So this is something that I hope that you can see that. It seems like there was a problem, but okay. This is then taking us fast forward to my own hometown, the city of Ulm in Germany. And you can see in World War II, this was a complete destruction of values, norms, and everything that life brought. There was no housing, there was nothing to believe in. The whole ideology of the Third Reich fell apart, and people were hungry. And there was a question of like, what comes after all that? Where are we in this? And how can we go on? And there was a complete need for rethinking life and living. And out of this came in 1946, by the way, 1 year after the end of the war, the effort by Inge Scholl and supported by the American forces to set up the adult educational institution, the public school, the Volkshochschule Ulm, to actually activate and engage people in shaping the political, social, cultural, and communal aspects of life in Ulm. And first you ask yourself, okay, what does that have to do with design? Well, first of all, it's about reskilling people and developing new visions and new aspirations for what life should look like. But design, of course, also comes to the fore here, because just 6 years later, 7 years later, we had the HFG Ulm, the School of Ulm, emerge to again address some of these issues through the lens of design, and really an effort to cope with those challenges of life, of contemporary life at the time, with design approaches. We're yet again at one of those turning points in history for humanity. And right now, luckily, we can say it's not, for us at least here in the room, for us, it's not a war that and the technologies are related to war that trigger our search for new design approaches. But it's the crisis that we have created as humans on this planet Earth. And we're seeing with these sustainable development goals, really 17 boxes that are challenging us to develop new design approaches to come out with better solutions and to be able to better respond and anticipate the kinds of developments that serve us well, that enhance human living, but of course guard the planet and help us as human life, as humans here to live well and dignified on planet Earth. What's interesting is one of these boxes, number 16, concerns itself with peace, justice, and strong institutions. And I will focus for the next part of my presentation on how I see this to be a design challenge and also where I see a role for design there. Before I move into that, as a piece of evidence that we are at this new cusp with new challenges in contemporary life, and how design yet again moves to the fore, you can look to the New European Bauhaus initiative that is now shaping across Europe, not only across the EU members, but across Europe. That's also interesting to see. And it's exactly another effort to bring design thinking and design doing to the fore, to cope with these new challenges, and of course to envision another way to enhance human living, with of course again the regard for planet and life on the planet as well. So this was kind of like my picture introduction, and now we're going into more the thinking and theoretical part of it, bringing together an idea or a characteristic of designing, changing, and organizing and managing that we need to keep in mind when we talk about designing transitions and also design in transition. And so I'll present to you what I call the 4 core organizational activities that are always connected to designing. But of course, they're also connected to changing. So when we talk about transformation and change, we're also talking about designing. When we're talking about organizing, we're talking about managing and changing. And of course, when we're talking about designing and we're also talking about managing. I give you one example. This is a bit of a complex diagram, simple as it is. But the complexity comes when you start filling it with your own examples. And when I challenge you, when you come up with one way that you can design something, and in this one way that you design something, you find that you don't have to change anything to get to that design. And I actually am willing to bet you that you will not be able to design anything without changing something. And of course, there is the challenge for us, because we have to then start to understand, well, what does designing mean here? Who is designing? What for? Why are the people designing? And when you go then and realize that you have to change something, of course, we in design can also start to ask the question, well, what kind of change are we aiming for? Is it going to be a very superficial change? Is it a change of material, of location, so rather simple? Or is it a change in thinking or even in behavior? So how are we approaching this question of designing? What for? What are we trying to achieve? But we know we change something, and we have to become aware what that is that we are trying to change and what that is that we can change. Because this sets the boundaries for what is possible and what is not possible through our design activities. When we then go on and accept that changing is part of this, we also realize we have to organize our thoughts, our processes, our materials. I mean, literally anything involved that allows us to move forward with this kind of change. And this kind of activities, but all 3 of them, designing, changing, organizing, require some kind of management. And here is the challenge for designers as well as for managers and people who are in the professions, as Herbert Simon said. How do we go about managing these kind of design approaches? If we have a deterministic approach to managing, we assume that we already know the outcome, and we basically just work towards achieving this outcome. So we design in that way that we achieve that outcome. We know exactly who it's for. We know what it's for. We know what to change, and we know how to organize it. And in the end, you know, if you're a car manufacturer, you have a deterministic view. You start with the idea that you will build a car and you will come out with a car. But what if we're in a situation like with the Sustainable Development Goals, where we're not sure what should be the outcome? I mean, other than an improvement for human life. Then we have an emergent approach to design, and we have to manage that in such a way so that new things are able to emerge, allowed to come forth, and you know, take form and take shape. And this is really what I will be talking about for the rest of this presentation, how we can contribute to engaging in open, emergent design approaches that can help us understand and develop new insights so that we can then also generate new possibilities that can give us new options in how to give shape to contemporary life. And while all of these 4 activities can be talked about in many contexts, from a human-centered design perspective, we are very much looking at the aim to innovate around people. People are in the center of our concern. And again, the human-centered design approach implies that we are then enhancing human living, which of course will not happen if we poison the waters or if we pollute the air. So the human-centered design here has to be taken in a wider sense. I want to underline an approach that is provided by John Dewey, or rooted in John Dewey, that human-centered design approach that I'm talking about. And it talks, or John Dewey talks about the qualitative, that which has qualities as the background, the starting point, and the regulative principle of all thinking. And in a very simple way, it is the qualitative here is different from the one that is quantitative, that can be measured, easily identified, and is known. But the qualitative is something that has to be approached with different methods to be unearthed and to bring into the to become knowledge that we can work on. However, what Dewey means here with the qualitative is really that we all have some kind of qualitative experiences, assumptions, background, and that we start our own activities, our thinking from there, and that even when we seek to apply critical thinking or the regulative principle, regulate our own thinking, that we go back individually to our qualitative understanding. And because of that, it is so important to concern ourselves with understanding more about the qualitative, because that is then when we think about designing, changing, organizing, and managing. It's the changing is about changing the qualitative or using the qualitative in such a way as to challenge our own regulative principles of all thinking. Another person who is really important in this context is Richard Mckeon, who talks about communication. And he's very clear that this is not something that's newly discovered. You all know communication as a problem, but communication itself is also a fashion, a way of thinking, and a method of analyzing that can be applied in the statement of all fundamental problems. And that means that we are also applying this to make judgments. And I will explain that to you over the next slides, what I do with that. Communication, in Richard Mckeon's understanding, implies 3 key activities. One is to discover ambiguities. The second part is to invent new possibilities. And the third means to express new values. Now, when you look at this is a description of communication, but it is actually very much a good description of what our task and challenge is in design. We have to bring together people from different backgrounds and different disciplines and different walks of life, people who have different kinds of qualitative backgrounds and starting points and regulative principles, and they are conflicting. But it is in bringing them together that we can open up that space and discover ambiguities. And once that has happened, once we have succeeded in that, we can then invent new possibilities. And then I explained new emergent possibilities, not the same old, but we can allow for something new to emerge from our common understanding. And the final act is to give form to that, and that is to express these values. It put this together in a slide here where I can show you that people interact with government through public services, and government and public organizations face massive challenges. That's the span of the public sector dimension that I work in as a designer. And I use the inquiry, which is by Dewey, this concept of qualitative background, starting point, and regulative principle, an inquiry into those backgrounds, into those starting points, and into those regulative principles. And then they end up being communicated through these 3 steps of discovering ambiguities, inventing new possibilities, and arriving at new values and giving expression to those new values. But what's important here is that we are doing this on an individual, organizational, policy, and society level, and that the inquiry into the individual, into the organization, into policy and society allows us to arrive at these new possibilities. Just to give you an example how this might be done when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and how this discover ambiguities can work. I have here 3 Sustainable Development Goals: the good health, well-being, the peace, justice, strong institutions, and also the industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And you can see 4 different sectors here on this diagram: government on the right-hand side up, academia on the bottom right side, business and industry on the lower left, civil society on the upper left. And the topic here that we're addressing is digital public participation. The question, of course, is how can the public participate in these digital offerings, let's say, from the government, be that public services like taxation, but also maybe human welfare services or other provisions. And what you can see, and what I'm hoping this diagram illustrates, is that everyone in these 4 sectors has a role here, and that the design comes together by bringing these ambiguities from these different sectors together, understanding and discover what's possible so we can invent new possibilities, and then give them expression by way of new services, public services, but maybe also products. But we need sometimes new laws for that. And we need sometimes just also new skills and new qualifications to get this done. So all of this indicates that what we're doing right now in contemporary life, when we have to move forward in these times of transition and upheaval, is to come together, bring together those different concerns, issues, and constraints, if you wish, and that we're then bringing those together. And our role as design is to really understand how to discover this ambiguity and to bring people together so that they can work collectively to take action through co-creation, and that they can come together to develop new solutions. This kind of new solutions often does involve the law, and that's why I think it's important to come back to policy design and to understand that what we're doing here in policy design from the start is about people, and really sets the frame already on top. So with the way we make policies is the way we go about, we delineate the future services and products that people actually experience in their everyday life, and the way that they experience life, because policies give shape to that. I have in this context developed a policy cycle model that is different from the one that you find usually in the policy realm with policy scientists, policy scholars, because in my policy model, you can see that services and people are in the center, and that we start the policy intent by understanding and discovering the ambiguities that exist amongst these different areas, and by bringing in people from the start, and by envisioning the kinds of services that might be needed or that might be desirable to bring a certain policy to life. But this model is really important to, or importantly shows that we need to think of people and the services that people will actually end up coming in touch with, that we need to start thinking about that from the start. To unfold this and to bring that back to the inquiry and the Mckeon approach of discovery, invention, and expression, you can see here that when we start with a policy intent, let's say to improve a certain aspect of, sorry, I'm blanking right now for an example, but if you think of a new policy and you want to achieve social innovation as an outcome, that is, you want to make sure that this policy actually achieves some kind of change within society to the better, ideally, then the first task is to understand who are the people and the services that might be affected. And then the second task is, of course, to bring all those people together and to discover these ambiguities and these issues. So when we talk the step from policy intent to policy making, that is the step that we use to arrive to discover, so that when we go into the policy making process, we can create the space to invent new possibilities for services and for policy implementation. And the final step in the policy making, of course, is to express this new value and these new intents in the kinds of services and in the actual policy that comes to life through services in the end. So really, it's important to understand that a policy itself is a product of design that frames the possibilities for many other products and services that come afterwards. It's the guideline, a framework that then also determines the relationships and the manner of the interactions that are possible, encouraged or discouraged within and by a particular human system. So the policy itself, if you wish, is a result of applied design practices. It actually already is an expression of design thinking, an expression of certain design concept and specific design methods. So what I'm telling you right now, and I hear that yesterday was a slightly different conversation, but what I'm telling you here is that when you're talking about a policy and policy design, we have to begin to understand the kinds of thinking that goes into the policy making from the start, because the policy itself is such an important product that it frames everything that comes after it. And so far, we have not been so good at challenging this, by the way. It's just starting. I'm saying this particularly here in Chile, of course, because you have had some conversations going on with the public management and with the public sector, but you're also in the process of redesigning your own constitution. And the kind of design thinking, the kind of design concepts, the practices of design that go into that will, of course, lead to a number of rules and regulations that then frame everything that comes after it. So this in its own right is a product of design. I just wanted to share with you also why this is something that is relevant to design practitioners. Sometimes that's something you will think that, no, that's not concerning us. But actually, you will also find the other way, that you as a designer, you're encouraged to engage with these issues that are maybe outside of your current practice realm or realm of profession. But there is much that you can contribute to, and there is a great need for understanding the design principles, the design methods, and the design practices at work in these legal and policy level questions. We're also working with different variations on that. One of the projects I'm involved in right now is the complaint system in local government in British Columbia. Same question here. What is the rule and regulation? What kind of system what kind of thinking goes into that before we even get to the actual services? So we're really designing way before we're actually providing the kinds of services and products that we're usually talking about in design. There's an example of the government in Brasilia in the Ministry of Economics, where they're also having a digital user research department to also give shape to these kind of government products and services in ways that people usually don't think about. Same at the ENAP School for Public Management and Administration in Brasilia. And there's much, how do you call that, many opportunities and many efforts to rethink how bureaucracy is being run and lived, and how bureaucracy can be different. And the Creative Bureaucracy Festival is one of these examples, which will, by the way, happen again in 2022. So keep an eye out for that. When we talk about policy design, you think maybe only rules and regulations in the traditional sense, but I'm also thinking about technologies. And one of the projects I'm working on right now is this voice assistance project. And it is very clear that we have to think and envision the kinds of rules and regulations and that are needed to make use of such a technology in a way that is both beneficial, but also safeguards public value, safeguards human dignity, safeguards democracy, tell you the truth. So this is an innocent little device, but we're really concerned with also understanding the qualitative, the background, the starting point, and the regulative principles that are currently implicit in this system as it stands, and how we can actually affect it in a way so that it really makes a contribution to contemporary human life. And with that, I thank you very much, and I'm more than happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you so much, Sabine, for such a brilliant presentation, not only in terms of content of theory, but also I'm sure the whole audience really appreciates the fact that you related this whole idea of social design to all the changes that are happening in Chile right now. Personally, I really appreciate that, because it gives us some type of really practical task, but also advice on how to operate on these challenges that we're facing in this country. So it's great to have that vision in terms of our new version of the Design Month here. Sabine, we have a lot of different questions. I wanted to, so much, because we've seen things with society, but also technology and people, organizations. And I would like to start by this diagram and framework that you showed us today on digital public participation, and the need to design for the common good towards social innovation, and that mindset that we need a new approach. And you are here showing us that kind of new approach has these 4 different layers. So education, skilling, new laws and regulation, technological innovation, and also co-designed and co-created online services. But you also mentioned that all of these challenges that we're facing are coming maybe from these ambiguities or these gaps.
Ambiguities.
Thank you. Between people that maybe don't have the same perspective on a process or maybe a policy or way of like thinking or seeing the planet and society. So in terms of like now digital public participation, and the challenges that we're facing right now with all these different stakeholders that you're showing us today, I wanted to ask you, how could we start in really like in a practical sense to bring together these different realms, organizations, businesses, citizens, and so on, to participate in what's coming in the future for digital law, digital policy, and public design?
It's a very good question, and of course not easy to answer, but there are ways to go about that. So what we have found so far is that we have to, you have to have a conversation with each of those different sectors to understand the basics about their challenges and what they're trying to do. Business and industry, of course, first and foremost, want to develop new products and services. They want to also be in business. I mean, that's business and that's okay. But the question then, of course, is like, can we align this kind of business desire and the business, profits and all that with the kinds of values and the kinds of aims that benefit, the society, or maybe to start small, the community. And with the community, then you go over to the municipality and the direction, and you ask them, what is your challenge? What is your problem? I'll give you an example in a moment. And in the with academia, you also find people who are, engaged in certain research aspects. And then with civil society, of course, they have a different kind of knowledge and then a different kind of interest about finding a specific solution for whom and what. And the idea of the Discovering Ambiguities effort is to generally assume a position where you don't start by saying this is mutually exclusive, but where you are actually saying, no, actually, somewhere in the space, there might be an opportunity for all of us to get out what we need to get out, but with a sense that we're contributing to the greater good. And we have a number of businesses now that are really trying to do business, create jobs for people who wouldn't get jobs. Instead of, I just went to the airport, there was a chocolate factory that claims, I don't know if it's true, that they're not using slave labor or child labor. So there is an effort, by business also to do some good. There's an effort by communities and civil societies to do some good. Most of the municipalities and government people I work with, most at least, actually are seeking to do some good. There's always someone who wants to abuse, the business wants to abuse that. You have bad people everywhere, but let's focus on those who are actually trying to make a change and towards the positive. And then you have also in research, a lot of people who can contribute with knowledge, insights, resources. This is what this is about. We need to get the resources, we need to get the knowledge, and we need to have the ability to sit back and also have differences, maybe even argue, but not give up on that, because we know in the end when we come to it, we get to something better. We're working right now on a project here that's called Municipal, and it brings together small communities, small municipalities with energy providers and energy businesses, with academic research institutions, and also with civil society, with an effort to co-create energy innovation. So what we have seen here is that energy innovations are often put on top of cities and municipalities, and that doesn't work, because the energy providers and the businesses don't understand what the real challenges are for those communities, and what the resources are, and what the possibilities are. So we're bringing them together. We bring in the community and the civil society to really work together on something that works for all. And it's everyone's interest. Everyone wants, most people today, if you ask them, they want to contribute to something positive, to climate, to achieving climate goals, to reducing energy use and all that. They just don't know how. And no one has the single answer, but we need to come up with something different and new. We know that what we've done so far is not really working, or at least not getting us there where we want to be. So then let's come together and let's restart this.
That's great. Thank you so much. That's really interesting. And also it relates to one of the questions that we have from your audience on the chat. In terms of like discovering these frictions, but also embracing the experience of these different stakeholders and people. And that comes with, like, as you mentioned, the qualitative parts of research and projects versus numbers. So Victoria here is asking, how can we show how relevant it is to actually see and embrace the qualitative in a context where the main value is the qualitative part of it?
Yeah, it's of course a very core question to anyone engaged in design, and because we are strong on the qualitative side, and we are of course continuously running into people who are trained on the quantitative side, and we have the challenge that we cannot be quantitative, because the moment you want to bring something into being, something that doesn't exist yet, you have nothing in the traditional quantitative sense that you can measure. You can only measure something after it exists. So we know now, and that's part of the reasoning and the way we start conversations, is like, is anything that you're doing right now working already for you? Or are you struggling to come out with solutions or results that actually are the ones that you try to achieve? If your process doesn't work right now, what risk is it to then try something else? That's one start. So the risk analysis is always about, what you're not doing is also risky. And if you know you're not getting it done in the kind of design approaches and design methods and principles that you're currently applying, then what's the risk of trying something else? And the qualitative, that's where I think we as designers are just still poorly trained. I was lucky to be, trained in as a PhD and all that, to have pretty good confidence in making these kind of arguments and detecting when somebody comes at me with an argument that is so rooted in the quantitative that it doesn't apply to my work. And that I can then say, well, you can do it as you want, and you can go back and do it the same way, but then don't be surprised if you get the same result. That easy. And there's one more that an example that I really like a lot, and it comes from the colleagues in the Ministry of Economics in Brasilia. When they are asked to justify their work, and people do think in costs, and they say like, well, our work, if you think of all the people that are wasting their time in front of the computer by getting frustrated, losing trust in government, but not getting their job done, and at the same time not working, not making money, that's a lot of cost right there. And if we can just help reduce this problem a little bit, that means we're increasing trust in government a little bit. If we can then get those people off this problem faster so that they can actually make money as they usually do and contribute to the economy, that's also money. So we have to learn how to think and articulate these kind of advantages that we're and contributions that we're making in different ways. And we have to be confident to do so outside of the quantitative rationale.
That's a great answer, Sabine. Thank you so much. Especially like that positive view that you're like giving us on being positive and being really like hopeful about these changes. Apart from this topic, we have a really kind of like practical question here, but very interesting as well.
Okay.
And it's on your great contribution on frameworks and all these diagrams and theory that you put together that are super intuitive to understand all these like social changes and the phenomena around people. And the question is, in your experience, what are the kind of challenges that you have seen in organizations when they must deal with these frameworks, not only to understand what is happening around them, but also in terms of mobilizing people, to manage people, and to actually create change? And as you said, like this whole idea of public policy is not just like a process, it's a product itself. So how do you see that?
So it's interesting because I just come from a meeting with a municipality here locally in Switzerland, where we as a competence center for design and management have worked with over more than 3 years now, as kind of a reflective board, I would say, like we call ourselves a sounding board. That is not true. We don't call ourselves a sounding board. They have titled us, given us the name as a sounding board. And it's a community, a municipality that really wants to take charge of digital transformation. And we have supported them from the start, that as a municipality, they don't have to just wait for management consultants and others to come over and push them back with technology, but that they can start to envision the kind of community, the kind of city, the kind of municipality and community they want to be. And then from there on, start to develop different skills and also implement that in their strategy to set the stage. Again, we're on the strategic level here, so that we have this aligned with their own long-term legislative and executive kind of planning to get this done. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is smooth. No, you have people who are very design oriented outside of design as well as inside design. There are some people who just intuitively grasp this kind of change issue, and they are comfortable with uncertainty. They're curious, they're eager to learn, they're not afraid to go out. But of course, they are also in an environment where there's a lot of people trained with very different mindsets, trained with very different expectations, different skills, different values, different norms. And this is a continuous conversation that we're having, especially in this time and age. I don't know if it's different in 20 years from now, but right now, this is a clash in many organizations. And we are trying to embrace people for who they are, and understand that some people have yet to be exposed or come in contact with this kind of thinking, this kind of doing. So we're trying to create opportunities for people to engage, connect, experience, expose themselves in this kind of ways, always in the context of their own work, so that what they're doing is not just an extra design workshop with design thinking or something, but something that they can rethink and redo some of their own work in different ways using different methods. And there is no guarantee that somebody will take to that, and there will always be some people who will just never ever come around, but there are many people who recognize the value in that. And so unfortunately, there are two statements that we always have in mind for this kind of work. One is called, we have to drill very thick boards. The wood is very thick that we're drilling tiny holes into, and it takes a long time, and you have to keep at it. And the other statement we say is like, we have to have a long breath, long patience, and we have setbacks, but we have to be at it So it is not an easy work, but we're talking about a real systemic transformation here across the board. So it cannot be expected to happen with one big explosion. And if you saw the Weimar Republic example I gave, the Weimar Constitution to this day remains as one of the most progressive constitutions that have ever been designed. And yet it failed utterly at the time. Of course, it was too much, too fast, too soon. However, today we can find echoes of the Weimar Constitution in our contemporary constitutions around the world, by the way, right? So it takes time. It's sad to say that some things do take time, and sometimes we don't have time. We know that, especially when it comes to the climate and the global crisis. So that's really the, in some ways that plays into the hands of design right now, because there's an urgency that has been created where we can come and help people become actionable. So maybe that's where we can leave it at this point.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's so interesting. And actually, it relates a lot with the question that I wanted to ask you. And it relates as well with Virginia's Jara question in terms of Chile. Mm-hmm. First of all, as I was saying, thank you so much for this whole historical context that you've been giving us. And in terms of the Weimar Constitution, the changes after World War I and II, and this idea of design showing up and kind of like building these bridges between people and these immaterial changes that sometimes we cannot see, but then like design comes and gives a shape. With this like mindset of like this historical overview, what do you think? Are we ready in Chile with what you know so far from this cultural point of view for all these big changes related to these echoes of changes that have happened in other ages as well? And as well, where are these like opportunities or of maybe, as you said, creating and recreating this trust in governments in general, when people feel kind of like lost in these uncertain times? How could we start? Maybe like a practical advice or a tiny starting point.
Yeah, let me just clarify so that it's not misunderstood. I don't think that design appears and is just there and saves the world. So that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is design is there all the time. But when things are no longer what they appear to be and can no longer stay the same, and we recognize that, that's when we start to rethink how we go about designing. And that's when design, strangely enough, in history has always shown up again, because then somehow design shows up in a more visible way. Design is always there. People design. The Weimar Republic, there was a lot, the way that the parliament, everything was designed too. But it came to a clash somehow. The way that the design thinking and design principles, it didn't work anymore. And that's when then there is a recognition that, wait a second, design, whoa. It's about design. It's about how we go about designing. So that's number one. Number two is, are you ready in Chile for that? I really, that's not a state or a judgment I could possibly make. What I have seen and witnessed over the last 5-6 years is that a tremendous amount of young people have rediscovered, especially also the public sector, and with that also, of course, government. And I think that's a very good start. I see that, by the way, internationally, that young people are rediscovering that the government is not just bad, and that if they feel that it needs to be changing, they have to engage with it. They have to work with the government. They have to bring their ideas into government. And that's kind of like happens through those innovation labs in the public sector and government, for example. And so I'm optimistic that there's also a new recognition. Also, Corona in Europe, at least, has shown that there is a role for a strong government. and that it's needed, and that it cannot be just taken for granted, but no, we have to contribute. So in a democracy, it's also us, are we ready individually to actually engage with that and to support that? So maybe that's my answer to that part of the question. And where are the opportunities now? Can you remind the last question? I took down opportunities, but maybe you can specify that again.
Sabine, we wanted to know, like, really briefly, maybe what could be a starting point to make those changes and to connect these different parts of society in building civic changes.
Yeah. Really, it's we can start with ourselves, and we can. That's the easiest way always in design. I really always hesitate when I hear designers say like, "Oh yeah, and I'm creating this, and then people have to do that," and I'm like, "Who are the people? Would you do it? You know?" So what is it that we're willing to contribute, and how can we, reach out? The worst problem right now, and many of you know that, is that we're in bubbles. And it's so easy to, even if you don't want to be in a bubble, it's so easy to be in one, because you don't even notice by the time that, you watch Netflix this, you go to that pub, you go to this train, and all of a sudden you're in a bubble. You have to get out of your comfort zone, and you have to step in parts of, the city that you usually don't go. You have to go to a place where people say like, "Oh, you've been there," go there. I mean, it's just all these aversions of like staying away. We have to re-engage with people, and we have to re-engage ourselves also with the government. And again, there are many opportunities now to work in government for designers, and with a design mind, and there's many opportunities to help shape this from the inside, or by contributing with your own personal work, that when you take a project, consider that and try to work across these different sectors. So that will enrich you, it will enrich your project, and it contributes a tiny piece to that effort.
That's a great answer, Sabine. Thank you so much. Thank you for a brilliant presentation, for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and these amazing insights. Now I'm going to switch to Spanish. Creo que el mensaje ya está hecho. Hay una invitación muy grande a crear oportunidades para que las personas puedan acercarse a los procesos de cambio, pero también integrar a distintos actores, públicos, privados, con herramientas y los métodos adecuados, tomando la tecnología y también una mirada de codiseño en todos estos procesos del futuro. Ahora le doy cierre a esta conversación y también le doy paso a Trinidad Guzmán, coordinadora del área de diseño y servicios creativos, para que nos pueda cerrar esta amazing masterclass that Sabine Junginger has shared with us. Muchas gracias a todos y todas.
Sabine, muchas gracias por la presentación. De verdad, me quedo pensando en lo que hablaste en relación a descubrir y saber el tipo de pensamiento que tiene la sociedad, cómo confluyen estos pensamientos y poder desde ahí planificar el diseño. Es decir, hacer un diseño de la estrategia de intervención política. Es decir, me parece que en Chile existe un gran problema, incluso desde los diseñadores, de entender desde la práctica, o sea, desde la investigación, perdón, teóricamente las necesidades de la sociedad, pero poca intervención territorial. Y me parece que ese es un punto que tú expresas en tu presentación, que es realmente valioso, de decirle a los diseñadores que salgan a la calle, que conozcan la realidad, que observen y salgan de la burbuja de efectivamente qué es lo que ocurre y cuáles son las necesidades reales, y a partir de eso construir políticas y desde ahí diseñarlas. Entonces, de verdad es muy enriquecedora tu presentación. Es algo que desde el área de diseño hemos tratado de impulsar como entidad pública, de mostrar a los gobiernos que han pasado durante estos 10 años el valor del diseño, pero desde la realidad, desde la intervención territorial, desde la comunión de las distintas miradas, y sobre todo desde un diseño colaborativo desde el territorio. Creo que eso es lo principal para la generación del diseño de políticas públicas. Así que muchas gracias, Sabine, de verdad, una gran charla y un honor tenerte aquí. Javiera, excelente, una gran moderadora. Entiendo que es muy importante para ti y ahora sé por qué. Sabine realmente es un referente. Así que muchas gracias, los dejo a todos invitados ahora. A las 11:30 tenemos un panel sobre diseño y experimentación. Tendremos casos concretos sobre cómo el diseño se puede aplicar y experimentar en distintas instancias de la sociedad. Así que los invito a las 11:30 a quedarse, ir a tomar un café, pueden estirar las piernas para encontrarnos a las 11:30. Así que muchas gracias. Para quienes quieran saber nuestras actividades, mesdeldiseño.cl, y esta masterclass estará grabada en el YouTube de Economías Creativas de Chile, así que pueden ir ahí, buscarlo y compartirlo con todos sus conocidos, amigos, y quienes crean que puedan estar interesados en el diseño de políticas colaborativas. Así que muchas gracias.